Ranking the future of every single NBA team was not easy. This took me a ton of time to figure out where I wanted to rank each of these teams within these 5 tiers, because there are so many teams that have such a bright future that I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section below about this list. We begin all the way at the bottom in the D tier, and first up, unfortunately for me, is the Brooklyn Nets. Now, you're going to start to see as we go through this that this is kind of like a 5-year timeline here. So obviously right now, Brooklyn, if everybody comes back, is still going to be a very good team. Or if they get some really good pieces in exchange for Kevin Durant in a trade, they're still going to be in a pretty good situation. But where they are right now, with Kyrie Irving on and expiring, his future up in the air, giving all these future draft picks to Houston, Ben Simmons' future up in the air given his injury history and the history of him basically not playing the entire year last year, and then whatever is going to happen with Kevin Durant, there's so much uncertainty there. And so this was one of the easiest selections for me to put them in the D tier. The only other team that find themselves in the D tier as well alongside of Brooklyn are the Washington Wizards. Now, when I did this during the year post-trade deadline, I had them in the C tier, and the reason that they went down is mostly because of the Bradley Beal contract. Because when you look at the rest of the roster, there's not a whole lot else to excite you here. Kyle Kuzma is fine. He's a pretty good asset. They've got a handful of guys that they've picked in the lottery over the last couple of seasons, none of which have looked particularly impressive at any point. I kind of still like Denny, but that's not enough to jump you up an entire tier. And Bradley Beal's new contract, I've talked about it a ton, the no trade clause, all that stuff, for me, bumps them down a tier. However, that's the entirety of the D tier. Everybody else is in a different category, and we move on now to the C tier. And I begin with the LA Lakers. And even though they owe these future picks still, and they're going to have issues getting rid of Russell Westbrook, and they don't really have any other talent on the roster, I feel like it's still difficult for me to put them any lower than C, because they still have LeBron. They still have, probably more importantly, Anthony Davis in terms of the future of this roster. And even though LeBron, we don't know what his future in LA is going to be, I still feel like if you have Anthony Davis and he's healthy, you have a chance to at least do something. And they're still the Lakers. They can still bring in guys as free agents into the future. I'm going to keep them in the C tier, but if you want to put them in the D tier, I wouldn't argue with you at all. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, a team that I had higher than this in the past, but there's basically nothing else in this roster other than LaMelo. They've got a future Denver pick, but when you look, it's Gordon Hayward on a big contract. Obviously, Miles Bridges is no longer a factor. PJ Washington, who's fine, but there's nothing else here that is this is the guy they're pairing with LaMelo Ball. And as much as I like LaMelo, I think they have to be in the C tier. Next up in the C tier is the LA Clippers. Similar story to what we did with the Lakers, where they owe these future picks. I like Kawhi. I like Paul George. Those guys are at least signed to long-term deals now, but given their injury history, I think they have a C tier future. Now, side note, if they're healthy, they're going to be really, really good this year. They're willing to spend a ton of money. They've got a ton of depth. But if we're looking at them 3, 4, 5 years from now, I'm not confident they're going to be one of the better teams in the league. And so they are in the C tier. And then last up in the C tier as well is Portland. They've got Damian Lillard signed very, very long term. They've got some other pieces like Anfernee Simons on a new deal making $20+ million a year. They've got Shaedon Sharpe. They've got Jeremy Grant. Yusuf Nurkic is back. They've got a lot of pieces here, but none of them really excite me as a future piece around Damian Lillard as of right now. Even though I like Simon, Sharpe could be something, and given Dame's age and the fact that he's coming off of an injury-riddled season, I think the C tier is a good place for them to be. And now we move on to the B tier. You can already tell we've only got 3 tiers left, and we have over 2/3 of the league left still to rank. There are so many teams that are set up so well for the future, and it becomes incredibly difficult and increasingly difficult to rank them as we go along in this video. Reminder, these teams are not ranked within their tiers. They're just tier by tier, not necessarily from start to end within the tier. But we begin with the Phoenix Suns. I flirted a little bit with putting them up a little bit higher. This is a team that just came off a 60-something win season, and even though Chris Paul is aging, they've still got Devin Booker, who's young, DeAndre Ayton, who's young, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. But given the way that they just looked in the postseason, as well as I don't really know what's going to happen with the ownership situation, I don't know if they're really going to want to continue to spend moving forward. They clearly weren't really that excited about bringing back DeAndre Ayton. They really did that almost out of necessity. I ended up putting them in the B tier. If you want to argue for A, that's fine, given some of the young guys, but I'm really, really uncertain about what their future holds as of right now as a true championship contender for the next couple of seasons, so they are in the B tier. Next up is the New York Knicks. Honestly, I wanted to put them in the A tier because I like the flexibility that they have with these future first-round picks. They have RJ Barrett. They could end up with Donovan Mitchell. There's still a lot of positive things that could happen with the New York Knicks moving forward with their future. They just fell a little bit short in terms of being in that A tier. You're going to see when we get there, those teams have an incredible amount of assets or one really good player, and New York just fell a little bit short of that. Next up is Miami, another team I had a lot of difficulty placing. Tyler Herro, Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, slight lack of draft picks into the future, and an aging roster for me bump them down just a little bit. I like Tyler Herro, but I don't think he's ever going to be an all-star. I like Bam. Bam's really, really good, but he's not like a primary number one guy that's going to carry you to a ton of wins. And Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry are getting older, so they are in the B tier. Next up, Chicago. If Lonzo was like fully 100% healthy, I would consider bumping them up to the A tier because Patrick Williams is still an asset, can still be something down the road. Zach Lavine is awesome. DeMar is still there. Vucevic, I like Io. But the problem is they owe some future pick. I think they owe one more future pick. No, they owe two more. They owe one to Orlando. They owe to San Antonio as well. And I just don't know what's happening with Lonzo's health. I don't know that he's an asset to this roster. I don't list him as one here. And so Zach Lavine by himself, I don't think can get them out of this tier. Next up is Sacramento. Maybe a team that some people think should be higher. I'm a little bit lower on De'Aaron Fox and a lot of other people. I feel like I like Sabonis, but I would have rather had Tyrese Halliburton and then Keegan Murray, who looked fantastic in Summer League and should be a really good player as a rookie. We'll kind of see what that means for their future. But for right now, I don't think they belong in this A tier that you're going to see here in a little bit. Next up, speaking of Tyrese Halliburton, is the Indiana Pacers. They've got Halliburton, they've got Mathurin, they've got Miles Turner, they've got two future first-round picks as well. They, again, are just short of that A tier for me because as much as I like Halliburton, I don't think that he's a number one moving forward. Mathurin, we just haven't seen enough of. Turner, they've been trying to trade for 3 years. And as nice as those future picks are, those two teams that they have picks from have very, very bright futures. So they're likely just late in the 20s. So ultimately, they fall slightly short. And then the San Antonio Spurs, who made a massive jump up from my previous future ranking because of the DeJounte Murray trade. They have Sohan, Keldon Johnson just got an extension, and they have a ton, massive amount of future first-round picks. I like the future moving forward for them just strictly in terms of their flexibility. If they had a player that they could build around and say, this is our guy, I'd feel better about them. So unfortunately, they're going to fall here into the B slot. And now we get to the A tier. This right here was by far the most difficult part of the video. The S tier teams, with the exception of one that I'll get to later, were pretty cut and dry. This section, though, was really, really difficult. We begin with a team that I moved up from B to A when I did my initial rankings, and that's the Philadelphia 76ers. So they have Embiid, they have Harden, they have Tyrese Maxey, they have some other stuff on their roster as well. And ultimately where I landed was, if I had Joel Embiid in the B tier, he would have been by far the best player individually in that tier by himself. Like the other two guys would have been Zach Lavine and Devin Booker, but Embiid was like a legitimate MVP caliber player this year. Not that the other two guys didn't have great seasons, but to see Embiid by himself in that B tier felt a little bit weird to me, and I think Tyrese Maxey has a solid future moving forward for them as well. The only reason that Embiid isn't higher than this, or that I considered putting them in the B tier anyway, is just because of the health stuff with big guys long term. Like who knows what Embiid is going to look like 5 years from now, but I ended up putting them in the A tier. Next up is the Utah Jazz. They have Donovan Mitchell. They have all these future first round picks as well. They, for me, aren't in the S tier because they're not keeping Donovan Mitchell and building around him, and he doesn't want to be there long term. It doesn't seem like. If they just had like a happy Donovan Mitchell, maybe one or two other young guys that are interesting, and all these future firsts, then maybe I could be convinced that they've got a really, really bright future. But with the uncertainty around the Mitchell situation, I put them in still very high in the A tier. Next up is Minnesota. I had them in the B tier initially, and then I kept rereading it, and I was like, wait, I'm overreacting a little bit in terms of their future with the Rudy Gobert trade. Because even though it brings them down, I think, a little bit for me, Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns are still awesome. And Ant specifically shows all the characteristics of a future superstar. And even though I don't like the value of bringing in Rudy Gobert and giving up all these future picks, I think Ant is just that special. And I don't want to forget about Karl-Anthony Towns either. And so they go in the A tier. The Houston Rockets are next. Again, maybe a team you could argue to have in the S tier, given all their future picks, given all the young players, given Jabari, given Jalen Green. I'm just, in comparison to some of the teams we're going to talk about here coming up, I'm a little bit unsure about who's the guy, right? Like Jalen Green was very, very good. Is he ever going to be an all-NBA caliber player? I don't know. Maybe he will. And if he is, obviously I'll end up being wrong about having them in the A ranking. I like Jabari as well. Awesome complementary piece. They have all the flexibility in the world. To me, they fell just a little bit short of the S tier. Next up is Toronto with the reigning Rookie of the Year, Scottie Barnes. I do think Scottie Barnes has all NBA potential. That's where they're here. They also have OG Anunoby. They have Pascal Siakam. They have Van Vliet. They have Gary Trent. They have all these different guys. I believe in the infrastructure there. They're going to go in the A tier. Next up is another team that I struggled with, the Atlanta Hawks. I put them in the A tier. They have Trey, they have DeJounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins. I almost put them in the B tier because of the picks that they gave up for DeJounte Murray. And when you start to look at their roster, you're just kind of assuming, oh, well, they've got all these young guys on the roster, right? I mean, not necessarily. Like, they've got DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, as I mentioned, but they're not as deep or as young as maybe I thought that they were when I just went to go look at their roster. But to me, still have Trae, still have DeJounte. I'm going to put them in the A tier. Golden State is next. They obviously have all the future guys with Wiggins and Wiseman and Poole and Kuminga. And then they still have Steph, Clay, and Draymond, who are going to continue to, be really good, I think, over the next couple of seasons, specifically Steph. It's hard to put them lower than A, given the fact they have the current guys and the future guys locked down. And then Detroit. Maybe I'm a little bit too high on Detroit. Maybe you could argue they should be in the B tier, but I love Cade. I think Cade's awesome. It seems like Jaden Ivey is going to be a great fit. Jalen Duren should be a good fit with them as well. Sadiq Bey on the wing. They don't have like any of the future picks, and so maybe I'm just way overvaluing the combination of Cunningham and Ivy, but I really like their future, and so I'm going to put them in the A tier. And then last up in the A tier, I really almost put them in the S. I couldn't quite do it, and it's the Orlando Magic. This is the team that I mentioned in the beginning of this section that I struggled with between the A and the S tier. I feel like every other team in the S tier is very, very clearly at the top of the top for the futures in the league. And Orlando fell like just inches short of this top tier. I really like Paolo. I think he's going to be awesome. Franz is awesome. Jalen Suggs still has an opportunity to come back from a rough rookie season. I think Wendell Carter Jr. is really good. They've still got Karl-Anthony, Markelle Fultz, Jonathan Isaac, Mo Bamba. They've got a future first from Chicago and a future first from Denver as well. And if Paolo's awesome this year, I think they're an S tier future team. The only reason they're not there is just because I haven't seen Paolo in a real NBA environment. I thought he looked incredibly impressive in his summer league few games that he played, but just based off a few games in summer league, it's hard for me to put them in the S tier. I want them to be there. I think their future is very, very bright, and they're right there from the S tier. I just need a little bit more tangible stuff from specifically Paolo here at the NBA level, and so they are the last team in the A tier. And now we move on to the S tier. First, we have the Memphis Grizzlies. That's pretty self-explanatory. Ja, Jaren Jackson, Desmond Bane, Zaire Williams, a ton of other players. They have, if they were like a bigger market team, they probably would have had another star there already. They have a ton of stuff they can trade to bring someone in. It's just because they're Memphis, and guys just don't want to go there for whatever reason. Their future is incredibly, incredibly bright. Cleveland, between Garland, Mobley, Jared Allen, some of the other guys on the roster as well. I love their future. They were in the S tier for me before as well. One of the brighter futures in the league. Milwaukee is here because of Giannis, and that's pretty much it. Like, obviously, Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton, they have other Bobby Portis, they have other pieces on this roster, but Giannis is an unstoppable force right now. He's going to be an MVP candidate for every season that he's healthy for at least the next 5 seasons. And to me, your future can't really get any brighter than that, especially considering the fact they've already won a title with this group. Continuing the theme of, like, you have this guy on your roster, they are going to elevate you to the S tier, is the Dallas Mavericks. Luka's there. I know they don't really have a ton of other stuff there in terms of like bright future pieces, especially now that Jalen Brunson is gone, but still, it's Luka. They have an S tier future. Denver, same thing, Nikola Jokic, but then they also have Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. returning from injury this season. They have to be in the S tier. And then we get to the two teams that, of course, have all the picks and all the young assets. OKC in New Orleans. OKC, of course, with SGA, Chet now, Josh Giddey, and all the future firsts that they have. And the Pelicans with Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, Dyson Daniels, and lots of other players and picks as well. No question, they are in the S tier, especially now that they've re-signed Zion. And then last up in the S tier is, of course, the Boston Celtics. They have Tatum, they have Robert Williams, they have Jaylen Brown. They have a team that just made the finals despite most of their players being 26 and under. Marcus Smart is there as well. They've really rounded out their rotation nicely this offseason. I see them as a team that is absolutely going to be near the top of the league for at least the next 5 seasons. I'm telling you right now, you might not like this list. You might think that it's not very good. Try it yourself. It's incredibly difficult. I've already got all the assets listed out for you to compare one-to-one. Make your own tier list. Send it to me over on Twitter, and I'll be interested to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section below as well. And I'll see y'all next time. Thank you.